So, this YouTube video here today we about to cut. I'm making a series of them for my sons and my daughters. My sons, because of a vision about an image and a likeness that God told me to us to preserve. By the way, for the video that I just cut on, I'm talking to Dr. Life. First responder, responding to man-made disasters. Man creates disasters for God's children to live through, and we're the first responders that God's children can call on in the midst of any disaster, in the midst of any snare, in the midst of any stronghold, demonic stronghold. And we will show up with the divine weapons to demolish the strongholds and set the captives free. We have been trained up in the way that we should go. We have received our approval, study to show thyself approved by God, a workman rightly dividing the word of truth. We received our accreditation on the highest levels. We are aliens in this nation. We live in this world. We're not of this world. This world is not our home. And though we live in this world, we do not wage war as this world does. The weapons that we fight with are not the weapons of this world. On the contrary, our weapons have divine power to demolish strongholds. We demolish arguments and every pretension. That's every imagination. You can't even dream up. You can't even dream up an attack on our God's kingdom that we won't crush. You can't even come up with any myth. And all that the enemy's attacks are nothing but imaginations. Every myth, every Greco-Roman myth of the Western world is an imagination. Every imagination that sets itself up against the knowledge of God. God already gave us even before they set up the Zeus and the Poseidon and the Neptune and the Hermes, even before they set up the Europa, which turned into Europe, the woman riding the beast, even before they set up any of these mythological lies to separate you, just know when you in those traps and when you're in bondage and servitude to the lie, there is a number that you can dial and call. You don't have to call the police. We already know they on the payroll of the beast. We just here to let this younger generation know you get to determine the outcome. You get to choose. You get to choose what the new millennium looks like. Now, they have a plan for you. The same one spinning all of the lies. They have a plan for the millennium. I'm going to show it to you. The income inequality that the world faces right now is to break the back of this younger generation and give y'all the appearance that there is no hope, so that you fall right into the trap, the traps, the many traps set, where you can be moved off of the land, moved out of the way. See, when there is a limited amount of resources, you got to understand there are two groups. There is a group that falls under the blessing of the Creator, and there is a group that falls. Both of these groups choose to be into these two groups. There is a group that falls under the blessing of the Creator, and then the group that falls under and have chosen to defy the Creator and separate themselves and put enmity between the Creator, His kingdom, His blessings, when they choose to do that, there is a limited amount of resources. God said, "Cursed be the ground. It will not bring forth fruit in its strength." That's the ground, period. This same creator said, "You must be born again." He said, "There, you can make the choice to come back home." Everybody can choose to start all over again and replenish the earth. That means recreate. Let's go back to the beginning. My bad. I was wrong. I went down the wrong road. While I still got breath, I want to redo. I chose wrong the first time. You was calling me to carry out a purpose in the will. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. You had a will for me to do, and I said, nah, I'm good. Didn't realize that was going to put me outside of the blessings and put me in the camp where my resources were going to stop, and there was not going to be any prosperity. Now, in that group, young people, understand, individuals respond to being in that group two separate ways. Some people respond the first way, say, "Yo, I'm going to take you up on that offer. I'm going to renew my mind. I'm going to be born." And he said, "Let this mind be in you. Let this mind be in you." This has to do with prosperity. This has to do with prosperity. This has to do with an exchange between the creator and exchange between your brother. The two are the same. Because he said, "When you've done it unto the least of these, my brother, you've done it unto me." So, those who hate the creator will hate their brothers. Those who hate their brothers will hate the creator. And as a direct result, your determination of whether your life will be filled with prosperity or curses comes into play. But those who are supposed to reap the benefit of being prosperous, you let those who are supposed to, you do the crime, you do the time, you let them off the hook by following after their actions, by embracing their same fallen mindset, by worshiping the same fallen myths and lies that they've chosen to worship. When you take their mindset instead of the mind of the creator, when you engage in their actions between a fellow man, am I my brother's keeper? Nah. Care nothing about my brother. Am I my brother's keeper? When you engage in those actions, when you follow them, you let them off the hook, and then God says, to him that knoweth to do good and doth not do it. To my children who follow that ignorance, he said, I'm going to deal with you even more. He said, to those to whom I love, I chasten. He said, I got a group of individuals on the earth that have hated me from the door. That have never, ever, ever, ever been under the camp of my blessings. I expect that because that's all they have ever given me. But when my children who have benefited from the relationship, the covenant relationship with me, time and time again, prosperity after prosperity, deliverance after deliverance, kingdom and prosperous kingdom after prosperous kingdom. The record is clear. It is not a question. The world has never seen greater prosperity than those who are under and attached to the covenant of blessings of the Creator. Just the wicked children who have chosen to defy God have done a better job marketing and telling their lost cause narrative. I'm going to give y'all an example. I'm going to give y'all an example of a lost cause narrative. Y'all need to know. Y'all need to know how individuals who cannot tap into, who don't have access to the life-changing power of the blessings of God, how they give the impression, the false impression that they rule. Listen up, my young people, because these same individuals have a plan of extermination for you. Have always had a plan of extermination for you. And whenever you blindly follow after their lost cause narratives, number one, that's when you, because God expects his children to be able to rightly discern and to reject the fallen and only follow him. He's like, if you don't have the sense enough to choose to follow me and my word over the word of a fallen human, oh, then your punishment will be that they will be the instrument of chastisement for you. You are choosing the belts and the extension cords and choosing the individuals in society to whoop your behinds generation after generation. Literally, that's what his children are doing. You know how your grandma used to tell you, go out there and choose your switch? This was wisdom. You're choosing your switch every day. There's no income inequality. There's only prosperity when God's children return back to their lifestyles. Return back to their image. Image is everything. And when you let them control your image, when you let them label you, when you let them brand you with whatever stereotype they want to brand you with, whenever you assume and you take on the brand that they have given you, whenever you assume and take on the name, listen to me, young people. We were sitting down at a table with Sony Records at the height. This is 95, 90. This is the height of when they talk about, yo, Thug Life with Tupac. This is at the height of when he has switched. This is the golden age of rap. Nas, Biggie Smalls. This is the height. Bad Boy. NWA, Ice Cube. This is at the height. When everything that they telling us for the 10 years leading up to that, from 83 until 93. From 83 until 93, they was producing crack baby after crack baby after crack. Listen, man, it was dang near impossible to be born in that generation and not be a crack baby. They had flooded our streets and they was branding us. The crack epidemic was the label that they put on us. The open air drug like, come on, man. That's the era that we lived in. Straight up, you pull up to the projects, niggas lined up around the, listen, man, ain't nobody, it wasn't even no hiding drug dealing and drug selling in them days. You will see the crackheads lined up. You will see them going up to the spot, coming up. They stick their hand in the thing, drop the crack. They put their money in the thing. They keep going. Like everybody in our generation, we had to live through that. That was a brand. They was branding us as that. They were creating the generation that you see now that they glorifying. They was laying the foundation in 83 and 93 for 2017 and 2018. A house don't get built overnight. They've been building this diabolical system, and we was at the height of it. Sony like, we want to make alienation a part of this image. Y'all trying to use the hip hop newspaper to get through and tell these people about their true heritage? Nah, we need 100% of your likeness. No, thank you. We good. Show you what a lost cause narrative is. First of all, just so you know,
now car flash for hard cash. Stop.
Name Operation Ring of Fire, and it's literally in essence like just briefly describe it.
Here we are in the early 90s telling people, yo, in the last days, the United States of America is going to strip down your Constitution. They're going to take away your First Amendment rights. They're going to take away your First Amendment rights. If y'all don't know, young people, they're going to take away your rights to free speech. You ain't going to be able to speak against the beast. They are going to censor you and prevent you from being able to do what it is we were doing in the mid-90s and letting people know, listen, man, you're in an ultimate battle for your soul. It's a raging war going on. They want to cut off your spiritual life support. And America is going to give the entities I'm talking about the Roman Catholic Church through Freemasonry and all of its fraternal organizations. Every last one of your fraternal organizations are branches of this New World Order tree. So in 95, we telling them stuff that they fulfilled in 2017. 95, 22 years ago. And in 2017, Pope Francis came here on the 500-year anniversary and made this music, this song, forever etched it in stone of prophetic fulfillment. Forever. 22 years ago. And there's still stuff in the song about when they do finally take away your rights, about how they're going to usher you into concentration camps and how the persecution is going to go down. This stuff has yet to be fulfilled. It's coming. And we didn't sign on the dotted line with Sony more than 20-something years ago so that today when this was going down, I wouldn't have some exec telling me, yo, you can't say that. Yo, you can't drop that. So in 2018, with my new crop, now we sitting in the same position that Russell Simmons was sitting back in the 70s. When this diabolical system that was hatched to brand you the way that they branded you They recruited people like Russell Simmons and Afrika Bambaataa to initiate our young people into the occult, pop culture, occult, hidden. What are they hiding, y'all? Oh, we here to tell you what they're hiding. That's what our life is about. We here to tell you. All they hiding is an indoctrination into being a child of the enemy. And consciously choosing, in whatever form you embrace from them, to remove yourself from the camp of the blessings into the camp of the cursed. And Russell Simmons comes in many different shapes, forms, and sizes. Men, women, Christians, Muslims, Asians, Latinos. Russell Simmons doing this job comes in many different shapes, sizes. And you better believe he's in them people who believe just like Russell, who is down with the satanic cause just like Russell, who are only there to recruit. So they position themselves in the music industry. They position themselves in fashion. They position themselves in those universities as psychologists, as doctors, as lawyers, as all of that. Then they create their fraternities to recruit people into their professions and then to get up to the highest places of those professions. And understand, they do the same thing in the theological seminaries in these universities. There's no difference. None. They find individuals who are willing to be paid to sell out and sell their souls and recruit the blind masses who should know better. God holds us accountable because we have the ability to study to show that ourselves approved, and he has called us to do it. But when they dangle the trinkets of this world before us, and we're more concerned about being famous, having a name, than we are about being approved by God. That's the whole thing, young people. Because God said, when you seek first my approval, he said, I'm going to add everything. I'm going to add a name. I'm going to add wealth. I'm going to add a kingdom. Solomon got all of that when he chose correctly in the door. He like, you just got to do it my way. You can't do it their way. He said, I'm going to add all of that. But y'all throw it away when y'all go to these cats instead of going to the Creator. Let me play you some of this is prophetic history. This already etched in stone's prophetic history, yo. Can't even be debated. 22 years ago.
It's a 3-step and perhaps more steps on the goal, but it is a plan to literally bring America to their knees under the new world order.
The Vatican influencing
the Vatican
of elimination of church and state
separation,
powers of persuasion, unified denomination,
no matter what
the scripture basis, all those who Bible foundation,
unified denomination.
I call this ecumenical operation, the
child of Satan in collaboration,
RPG, God's army, release liberty, deputy, here to inform you personally that when you stand steadfastly, persecution the penalty,
persecution
this religious entity that is
God's enemy.
Now stay prepared for the spiritual warfare. Knowledge increase, men running to and fro because they scared, barking to pieces. Sunday worship false thesis, shredded to pieces.
Worship false thesis.
Coming to Jesus, you pagan street talk, you sleepwalk. 5% Pope affiliates, they color Christ, you're not even feeling it. Forced variations, what you dealing with.
5%
leave your pocket, shotty pop in your body box. Dark future, dark past. Loud car flash for hard cash. Stock market crash.
Stock market crash. 40-yard dash.
Cause they don't care.
Instigating warfare.
Make riots. Now Now
mega
Sunday they
riots.
want to try it.
Now Sunday they want to try it.
Martial law, their solution, real safe persecution.
Real safe persecution.
White supremacists, biochemists, engineering diseases trying to end us.
Biochemists, engineering diseases trying to kill us.
Publishing false information, passing laws in their own favor to control our behavior.
Trying to control our
Infiltration from
behavior.
higher levels, the replacing of God laws with
The doctrine of the devil.
The righteous rebel.
Righteous
And all
rebel.
The original God haters, designing schemes to terminate us, depopulate us, to make it hard for us to rise.
Depopulate us.
Some infiltrate us in our ghettos, COINTELPRO.
Show you.
These are the people who will go to any extent to get
The population.
for the government. Power that shall come an hour when they declare martial law, and all we'll be fighting for
is our freedom. Martial law. Work camps.
Persecution of those who refuse to receive an unholy stamp.
Secrets of man who push the pens to make the world's decisions. Take
Millennium.
women on a wild ride.
Millennium.
Dark side. Spider-Man combined with Satan brings a multi-pyramid game plan into effect. Dialect the fallen angels human eyes can't detect. Strolling invisible realms. Demons control minds through TV, radio, and films. Instead of going from God to all-knowing. Man hearts are getting cold, and guess what? It's still snowing. The truth I love you with, they probably shed my blood for this, but I gotta uplift with a gift I was blessed with. We're living in a nation that's embracing Satan. It's not accusation. It's fact.
You face to read Revelation.
Who you think the beast is? Who no more secrets? The enemy you sleep with. His darkness is the deepest. I keep this through Holy Spirit power. This world is in its final hour. Demons cower, cause Jesus will bring that hellfire shower. Out you know the truth you're about to know.
Never stuck to these
95 theses.
Protestants with justities. Pay attention to Roman authorities. Underlying Catholic supremacy. Vatican accessories, they hold heat. Was set up from the jump street.
95 theses. They just joined and signed the Declaration Act. Everybody is under Rome. 2017. 22 years ago, he dropped.
The papacy, another murder man against the agency. Lincoln's legacy and tendency. Renounce the doctrines that will mark that. Get up and look then. To your left is an assassin. Pagan worship. Transfer the Christian fellowship.
Transfer
between
the
Rome
Christian
and the Protestants.
fellowship.
Pagan monuments and secret documents.
Because under the executive orders,
Under the executive orders,
an
FEMA,
economic collapse can be used
Economic collapse
to declare a national
can be used.
emergency, and hence martial law and hence putting us under FEMA, which would spell the beginning of the end for life as we have done it in America.
An economic collapse can be used. 22 years ago, an economic collapse could be used to under FEMA to transfer power to the President of the United States to enact martial law and everything that you heard in the song. 22 years ago. Just talking about a vision. After we sat down at the table, we said, nah, we ain't giving nobody our likeness. This is the album that we dropped after that. So we dropped 2 Edge records. Then after we said, nah, we're going to control our likeness and say what we got to say. Only the Holy Spirit and the Creator gets to determine what we say. Young people, the image is the fruit that you produce. So it don't matter what we said. The lives that we produce that match the words coming out of our mouth, just like the Creator when he said, let there be light. And when he said, he created man and he created woman, only when they reflected his image, only when they produced the same lifestyle, did his word become fulfilled. Their lives were the testimony stating that God cannot lie. The perfection and the blessings that they reaped, the dominion that they reigned over the earth is yours if you just return back. Now I'm going to show you how those who've been losing the battle all the time have spun the story back in their favor, and they tell a narrative. We all know that the British lost the war in America, right? We all know. Everybody knows that the British were defeated. Everybody knows that the Union defeated the Confederates. Right? This is historical fact. The army of Abraham Lincoln from the North in the Civil War of the United States of America defeated the Confederates, right? So now watch how Britain, on behalf of still wanting to control the United States of America, and the Confederates, who lost to the Union, who wanted to perpetuate the system that they had created. This was this is what the Confederacy was based on. Right? How to make a slave. Plantation slavery in the South. This is what the Confederacy was fighting for. Once again, I told you, they have a plan. They have always had a plan. They have always had a plan for what they consider resources, what they consider property, what they consider wealth to be owned. These are the titles and the brands and the labels that they created corporations to be able to carry out their plan. What is a corp? A corpse. Dead. God said he breathed into the nostrils of man, and man became a living soul. And then they say corporations are people too. C-O-R-P-S, plural, corpse. Dead. Dead people. Walking dead. They've created artificial dead entities to enslave the real beings that God has given breath to. And when you acknowledge their system, when you accept any of their rhetoric and deception and embrace it as truth, that's when you literally become their property. That is the exchange in a system. Same thing with God. God says, I have a covenant. I'll make a covenant with you. If you exchange with me, I came to set the captives free. When you exchange with me, you are free. You live. You have life. When you exchange with the fallen, you are a slave and you are controlled by their debt, the corpse. They created corporations, corporate entities, artificial, soulless, no spirit. That's how they can conduct the business that they do. And as long as it generates a profit, long as their plan generates a profit, they don't mind. They'll put a taskmaster out there that got to deal with the day-to-day heinous killing and all of that. Long as their profits keep coming in, and long as the taskmasters do their job, they done separated themselves from, it's the corpse doing it. The only way to get to erase the inequality is to return back to the exchange with the Creator. Real quick, I'm going to show you how they switch the narrative. Then I'm going to end this video and come back later. This is called the Lost Cause narrative. And the nations that have colonized the world I understand. The same nations that colonized the world are the same nations that ran up on the Messiah and the Creator and crucified him. the Hebrews, the Greeks, the Romans. And then when he sent his disciples into all of the world preaching the gospel, they threw him in coliseums and persecuted him, and then took his name after he died and created a pagan version of his name called Christianity. This is what the Romans did. I mean, this is documented history, man. Stop it. Stop it. It's documented history. And then they retold a loss that they took. They couldn't prevent him from healing the sick and raising the dead. They could not stop him from reintroducing the people to the everlasting covenant. They could not stop him from redeeming man, dying like he said he was, going into the grave and raising again, and then more importantly, pouring out his spirit. And then his people who he trained received his Holy Ghost and then did the same exact, identical healing, feeding. Come on, man. It was a loss. And instead of just accepting it and accepting the gospel, no. They decided from that time till this to retell the story as if they are superior and that they won when the whole world knows that they lost. But God, like, I expect that from people who have always been against me from the door. But for my children, who I sent that gospel to my children whose parents received that Holy Ghost, to my children who took that gospel all across the world, to my children whose families was made whole, to my children who experienced that blessing, for you to then get separated from that blessing and be just as ignorant today as they were when I first showed up, it's not acceptable. But this is how it happened. This is a lost cause narrative. This is how they retold the story of the Confederacy. This is what they've been doing throughout history. This is documented. This ain't no, listen, young people, take note.
That sort of language is part of an intellectual movement called the Lost Cause. Listen to how this textbook describes slavery.
The master often had a barbecue or a picnic for his slaves. Then they had a great frolic. Even while working in the cotton fields, they sang songs. The beat of the music and the richness of their voices made work seem light.
Yikes, that's from History of Georgia, a textbook published in 1954 that was taught across junior high schools in Georgia for decades. That sort of language is part of an intellectual movement called the Lost Cause, a distorted version of American Civil War history that's been prevalent in the South for a long time. It took shape soon after the defeat of the Confederate States in the war, when Southern historians like Edward Pollard and former Confederate General Jubal Early started preserving the South's perspective through their writings. They framed the Confederate cause as a heroic defense of the Southern way of life against the overwhelming forces in the North. That narrative has a few basic tenets: the glorification of Confederate soldiers who died for a cause they believed in, the belief that slavery was a benevolent institution, and maybe most importantly, that slavery was not the root cause of the war. The Lost Cause is one of the most notoriously effective efforts to rewrite history, and it was done by the losing side. So how did it become so deeply rooted in Southern memory? Blame the United Daughters of the Confederacy. The UDC was founded in Nashville in 1894 to preserve Confederate culture for generations to come. The women who made up the group descended from elite antebellum families, and they used their social and political clout to spread the pro-Southern version of the war as real history. You've probably seen their efforts to honor the Confederacy, but maybe you didn't know it was the UDC. They're the ones who covered the Southern landscape with memorials for Confederate leaders and soldiers. They used their fundraising and lobbying skills to pressure local governments into erecting monuments in prominent public spaces like courthouses and state capitals.
Installed here next to the state capitol by the United Daughters of the Confederacy.
The United Daughters of the Confederacy donated this memorial to the city back in the 30s.
They put them along roadsides and in parks. Any place that was remotely relevant to the Confederacy was memorialized. By the early 20th century, the UDC had 100,000 members in chapters spread all over the country, but mostly in former Confederate states. And there's a reason they grew so quickly during that time.
So we're talking about roughly 3 decades after the end of the war, and the Confederate veterans themselves are beginning to die off. So there is this push to find ways to commemorate it, because the big challenge by 1900 was there's a new generation of white Southerners being born, and they never experienced the war years.
That push is visible. Most of the Confederate monuments were erected during the UDC's height of influence.
There's a rhetoric around monuments that we want to get this thing built before all of that generation has died off, and the reason we want it is to teach future generations about those men.
Dr. Karen Cox wrote the book on the UDC, and I asked her if it was fair to say the group established the lost cause as historical fact in the South.
Oh my God, yeah, they were the leaders of the lost cause into the 20th century, and they made it a movement about vindication.
Just to give you an idea of how effective they were, they successfully lobbied for a Confederate memorial in Arlington National Cemetery, which U.S. President Woodrow Wilson proudly unveiled to a cheering crowd. Now that's influence, right?
Monuments are the least of what they did.
What?
I mean, they are the most visible and tangible, but the work with children was far more influential.
It turns out a central UDC objective is shaping how children think about the war and their Southern heritage. One of their most powerful tools? Textbooks. Take a look at this pamphlet called A Measuring Rod for Textbooks. It was written by the illustrious Southern historian Miss Mildred Rutherford, an educator, orator, and author of Southern history textbooks. She's also very pro-slavery. The pamphlet announced the formation of a textbook review committee featuring prominent Southerners like 5 former Confederate generals. This group was committed to spreading the truths of Confederate history, so they instructed school boards to reject any textbooks that did not accord full justice to the South. And they urged libraries to deface every book in their collection that didn't measure up by writing the words "unjust to the South" clearly on its cover. This pamphlet was shared widely with school boards throughout the South, and UDC-backed committees closely monitored history books to make sure Northern influence never reached classrooms. So the core language of an approved textbook aligned precisely with that of the lost cause. You know, stuff like,
the Confederacy lost in the war between the states, but Georgia never forgot to honor her Confederate soldiers.
History of Georgia was on the UDC's approved list. It was also written by E. Merton Coulter, a self-described Southern historian and historian-described white supremacist.
They understand that how you educate, who wins the writing game, who wins the battle over history, ultimately wins the war. That's the big fight for the UDC.
But their work with children went further than the classrooms. The UDC formed an auxiliary group called the Children of the Confederacy, which was designed to get kids born in former Confederate states to actively participate in their version of history. Group leaders had kids recite call and response truths from something called the Confederate Catechism. Children up to the age of 18 would compete and be rewarded for memorizing long passages of lost cause rhetoric.
So it would be like an after-school thing, you know, like that was your club. You would go after school to the meeting of the Children of the Confederacy, and your leader might teach you songs of the South like Dixie or other songs that were considered Southern patriotic songs. They would have them write essays, go visit the veterans, and learn this catechism.
Children were also the centerpiece of their community's monument unveilings, like this living flag at the dedication of the Stonewall Jackson Monument in Richmond. Yes, those are school children. The UDC's efforts shaped the identities of children who grew up with the lost cause. They made history personal, and that made their story last longer.
Generations of children learning that narrative in a variety of ways grow up to be, you know, segregationists in the 50s and 60s, because that's been drilled into them since they were children.
After World War I, the UDC started losing steam, but the damage was done. The monuments were in place, and the textbooks they wrote remained in Southern classrooms until the late 70s. And the women's group did it all without the right to vote or participate in politics.
You can still get glimmers of this lost cause memory of the war from people who will always choose to see it through the personal. And I think the UDC, to a great extent, was their goal.
So the next time someone says the Confederate monuments are about remembering our history, just know that that's exactly what the United Daughters of the Confederacy wants you to think.
So it's clear. The Daughters of the Confederacy created a lost cause narrative. So the monuments, the Charlottesville event that happened under Donald Trump's administration, young people understand, they created all of this years ago. They programmed young people during the time of right after the Civil War. And those young people that they programmed with this lost cause narrative went on to, number one, join the KKK. Remember, this is during the same period where they were doing the blackface, 1820s to 1910 or something. When they first started doing movies, they were doing caricatures of us in blackface. And then when they did the very first movie, they did the racist movie, Birth of a Nation. That gave a rebirth to the KKK. So these children that they were programming with this went on to be influenced by the theater of blackface, influenced by the film and the movies. Once again, we're talking about images. You got to control your likeness. When they get to determine your story, when they get to determine your image, the stereotypes that the world sees you as, and then you buy in and you start living that life of the thug, of the rapper, of the drug dealer, of the violent, whatever they done branded us as for 200, 300, 400, 500 years as. And when you settle for that instead of your true identity and likeness, that's why our communities never, it don't matter how much bread flow through them, it's not blessed, it's cursed. The minute that this generation stand up and say, no more, man. We royal. We get royal bread. We conduct ourselves as royal kings and queens on all levels. Our women ain't property. Our women ain't meat. You can't do what you want to do to our women and our children and our families, period. Once y'all step up, we stood up. And we got fruit to prove that we stood up. Now, we're going to reinvest in y'all resources that we didn't have. And if y'all stand up like we stood up, with the resources that we didn't have that we now have, y'all going to show the world what your true image and likeness is. Peace.